Hello and welcome to Lamplighter. Today is June 14. Today in our daily Bible reading, we continue to read about the nation of Israel in the north and the nation of Judah in the south and the various kings that rule over each. We begin today's reading in Judah in the south. Remember in our discussion yesterday, Joash was the boy king. He was being instructed and tutored, you might say, by Jehoiada the priest. And Jehoiada is a very good man, and Joash is a good king. Well, time has passed, and Joash has grown older, and Jehoiada chooses 2 wives for Joash, and he begins his family. Now, Joash then gives an order to repair the temple. He calls in the Levites and he says to them, the money that's coming in for the temple through contributions, the money that's coming in through temple tax, whatever it might be, I want you to take that money and give it to workmen to repair the temple. Now you might ask, why does the temple need to be repaired? Is it just weathered? Is it just showing its age? But we're also told a little bit later that the sons of Athaliah, remember the woman who was queen for a while and wanted to usurp the throne and even tried to kill her own sons. Athaliah's sons have come into the temple and they have sort of ransacked it. They have taken some of the treasured things out of the temple and taken them for Baal worship. And so the temple has been left in a state of disrepair, and Joash wants to correct that. And so he gives this instruction that the monies be used for repairing the temple. But we're told the Levites to whom this instruction is given do not act at once. But we're not really given a reason for that. We'll come back to that story in just a moment. But for now, the scene shifts back to the north, to Israel. Israel is being attacked by foreign armies, and this is interesting because we get the idea that God is working with with Hazael again, the king of Aram, for the simple purpose of reducing the size of Israel. And so Israel is being invaded once again by the Arameans or the Syrians. In the process of this, Jehu dies. He has ruled for 28 years, and then Jehoahaz, his son, becomes the next king of Israel. When we read about Jehoahaz, we're told that he reigns for 17 years as king of Israel, but like so many of the other kings of Israel, he is evil, just like Jeroboam who had gone before him. The scene now shifts back to Judah once again in the south and the repairing of the temple project. We're told that now we are in the 23rd year of Joash's reign, and still the priests have not repaired the temple. And so Joash is going to take stronger action. He wants to make sure that this temple repair project gets off the ground. And so he puts out a proclamation telling the people in the land what he wants to do and asking for their cooperation in giving their tax money, giving their money for the treasury of the temple, or even just free will donations to make this project possible. And the people are going to respond very favorably. Let's notice the reading. I'm going to be reading a couple of sections on page 750. The money brought into the temple was not spent for making silver basins, wick trimmers, sprinkling bowls, trumpets, or any other articles of gold or silver for the temple of the Lord. Well, then what was it used for? It was paid to the workmen. And notice this is interesting. It was paid to the workmen who used it to repair the temple. They did not require an accounting from those to whom they gave the money to pay the workers because they acted with complete honesty. Is that not incredible? They didn't require an accounting of the money because the workers and those who were giving them the money could be completely trusted. We'll see more on that in just a minute. The money from the guilt offerings and sin offerings was not brought into the temple of the Lord. It belonged to the priests. The men in charge of the work were diligent, and the repairs progressed under them. They rebuilt the temple of God according to its original design and reinforced it. When they had finished, you ready for this? They brought the rest of the money to the king and Jehoiada, and with it were made articles for the Lord's temple, articles for the service and for the burnt offerings, and also dishes and other objects of gold and silver. As long as Jehoiada lived, burnt offerings were presented continually in the temple of the Lord. Jehoiada has had an amazing positive influence on the land of Judah and specifically on Joash the king. But then, unfortunately, we're going to read that Jehoiada dies. Now, what's interesting about this is that he has done so much good for the temple and for God himself that even though he's not a king, he's a priest, he's buried with the kings. That's quite an honor, and that's quite a statement of Jehoiada's character. After Jehoiada is dead and buried, Joash then starts to accept pagan practices. After the death of Jehoiada, the officials of Judah came and paid homage to the king, and he listened to them. They abandoned the temple of the Lord. They've just repaired it, but they abandoned the temple of the Lord, the God of their fathers, and worshipped Asherah poles and idols. Because of their guilt, God's anger came upon Judah and Jerusalem, although the Lord sent prophets to the people to bring them back to him, and though they testified against them, they would not listen. So then the Spirit of God came upon Zechariah, the son of Jehoiada the priest. He stood before the people and he said, "This is what God says. Why do you disobey the Lord's commands? You will not prosper. Because you have forsaken the Lord, he has forsaken you." But they plotted against him, and by order of the king, they stoned him to death in the courtyard of the Lord's temple. King Joash did not remember the kindness Zechariah's father Jehoiada had shown him, but killed his son. And his son says, as he's dying, "May the Lord see this and call you to account." Excuse me. Those are some amazing dying words. May the Lord see this and call you to account. The scene shifts back to Israel. Israel is once again oppressed by the Syrians. Jehoahaz, who is the king of Israel, repents and seeks God's favor, and God actually hears him, listens to him, and backs off the army. But in the meantime, Israel has suffered greatly from this attack. In fact, the text says that they are made like dust at threshing time. They've suffered several losses. The scene shifts back to Judah. Judah is now punished by the Syrians. And we pick up that reading on page 751. At the turn of the year, the army of Aram marched against Joash. It invaded Judah and Jerusalem and killed all the leaders of the people. Because Judah had forsaken the Lord, the God of their fathers, judgment was executed on Joash. Now Joash, the king of Judah, we're told, took all the sacred objects dedicated by his fathers and all the gold found in the treasuries of the temple of the Lord and of the royal palace, and he sent them to Hazael, king of Aram, who then withdrew from Jerusalem. So the Syrians are kind of bought off for giving them some mercy, showing them some grace. The scene shifts back to Israel. Jehoahaz dies. Jehoash becomes king. He reigns 16 years, and he too is described like Jeroboam, wicked in all his ways. Elisha makes an interesting deathbed prophecy. Jehoash comes to see Elisha as he is dying, and Elisha says, "Take a bow and arrow, open the east window, and fire an arrow." He does, and he says, "This is God's arrow of victory. You're going to defeat the Syrians or the Arameans." Then he tells Jehoash to take the arrows and beat the ground with them. Jehoash strikes the ground just 3 times and stops, and it angers Elisha. And Elisha says, "You're only going to win 3 battles over the Syrians because you stopped. If you had done it 5 or 6 times, you would have been able to destroy them completely." Kind of a fascinating story. Elisha dies. The scene shifts back to Judah. Joash is assassinated. He's wounded in battle, and then some of his officials then murder him. And that's the way today's reading ends. all kinds of things are happening in Israel and in Judah. We continue to see wicked kings ruling in Israel. We see some good in Judah, but still some evil influence as well. And it seems at times that Satan is winning the battle. But overall, as we back up and continue to remind ourselves of the bigger picture, this is a story about God. God is always victorious. God always wins. And whoever is on his side, whoever chooses his way, his rules, his statutes, his commandments, his guidance, those who deny self and follow him, not only in the days of the Old Testament, but even in the day that we live today, God is faithful. He always has been faithful, and he rules over all creation and seeks to bless us. Isn't it great to be a lamplighter? His word is a lamp to our feet and a light to our path. I hope you have a blessed day.